Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new tutorial series on Flutter. Now Flutter is a framework made by Google that lets us build pretty much every kind of application that we want. So we can build iOS apps, we can build Android apps, we can build web apps, we can build desktop apps. Whatever you want, you can probably build that with Flutter. And the great thing with Flutter is the speed and how easy it is to take code that you've written, say, for iOS and translate that into an Android application. And in fact, what we're going to be focusing on here is actually building mobile apps. So building Android apps and iOS apps. And the great thing is that all of the code that I write is pretty much going to be able to run on both an Android device and an iOS device at the exact same time. So there's going to be no changes you really need to make. You're just going to be able to run whatever code you write here on both an Android device and an iOS device. So you're pretty much making two applications with just one singular code base. So that's a huge advantage of Flutter, and there's no speed decrease in doing this because the language that Flutter uses is called Dart. That can actually be compiled natively into Android OS compatible code and iOS OS compatible code, right? So that's great. That means this is a super fast application. It's going to run, like any native app would run on Android or iOS. There's no slowdowns because of a heavy framework around it. There's a ton of other advantages of Flutter and the language Dart, and you're going to see how easy it is to actually build some pretty basic applications. And that's what this tutorial series is going to be focused on. We're not going to be building any production level applications. We're just going to be learning a bit about this framework, kind of getting our, hands wet or feet wet, whatever you want to call it, with it, and just getting comfortable with it so that if we want to actually make some more complicated apps, we can do that. Everything's set up on our system and we're ready to go. So with that being said, I'll talk quickly about this tutorial series. This first video is really just going to be getting everything set up. So getting our development environment set up, get all our plugins installed, everything downloaded that we need to. This process will unfortunately take a long time just because the setup is pretty difficult and pretty tedious. But once we get through this, it's pretty much smooth sailing and we're just going to be writing code and building applications. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that we're going to do, and that I'd recommend you guys do, is head over to the Flutter website. All of the links that I mentioned here will be in the description, by the way, so you can find them there. And go ahead and click on this Get Started page and go through the installation guide for your specific operating system. So of course, I'm going to summarize this whole installation guide, but I just know things are a little bit different if you're on Mac or if you're on Linux, because this is going to be for Windows. So you might just want to go here, at least have this as a reference so that you can see what's happening, say, on the Mac OS side, which might be a little bit different than it is on the Windows side. Again, once you get past kind of installing the Flutter SDK, things will start to kind of synchronize between the different operating systems. But I just want to make sure you don't rely solely on this video because there will be some things that are going to be different between the different operating systems. Like, for example, if you're on iOS, you're probably going to be using Xcode, whereas if you're on Windows like me, we are going to be using Android Studio and VS Code. Anyways, once you do that, let's move forward. The next thing we're going to do is install Git. Now, you don't need Git, but for this video, at least, I'm going to be using it just because it makes things a lot easier. So go to this link in the description, download Git for your operating system. Most of you probably have this, and then just make sure that once you've downloaded that, first of all, you add this to your system path so that you can go into a command prompt window or a terminal window and type Git. If you type Git and you get some kind of help command stuff popping up, boom, you're good to go. You've installed it, downloaded it, and yeah, we're good to continue. So once you've got Git, what we're actually going to do is we're going to go to the location that we want to install our Git on. Or not our Git, sorry, our Flutter SDK on. So essentially the first step is to download the Flutter SDK and add that to our system path so that we can use the Flutter command from our terminal. So what we're going to do is pick some location that does not have, I think it's heightened privileges. So that's not like an administrator folder or something. So don't put it in your program files. Don't put it, system32, don't put it anywhere like that. Find some place like in your documents folder or in your downloads or on your desktop or wherever you think you're not going to lose it or it's fine to be there that does not have elevated privileges, and install this in. So I'm going to go to my SSD number 1. I just have a bunch of drives. So I'm going to make a folder on here. You can see I actually already have Flutter, and that's where I'm going to install it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a command prompt window in this location. So to do that, I just went up to this top bar and typed CMD. That opens the command prompt, and you can see the location is is on the Z drive. So just get your command prompt so that this location on the left-hand side here is where you actually want to install this. If you're on Mac, I think you can right click and click open in terminal or something from the Finder, and that should open up. If you're on Linux, I'm going to hope that you know how to navigate the command prompt. So once you have that, we're going to use Git to actually clone the Flutter SDK right into this folder so that we don't have to do any extracting or downloading ourselves or anything like that. So I'm just going to copy this command. I'll put it up on the screen and leave it in the description. But this is what you want to do. You want to type git clone and then https://github.com/flutter/flutter.git-b/stable. So you can find this from the Flutter website as well, but again, this will be in the description. Hopefully you can see it on the screen right here. And once you've done that, assuming you don't have a folder called Flutter already in this location, it should start downloading all the files, and the Flutter SDK should be downloaded right here. Now, once you've done that, we're going to need to go into the Flutter SDK. So open up this folder, and we're going to need to go to the bin folder. Now, the reason we're doing this is because we need to copy the path to this bin folder. So we just need to find where this bin folder is and copy the path. So in my case, I'm on the Z drive, I'm in the Flutter folder, and I'm in bin. So let's copy that right here. Let's say you're on your C drive, you're in your users folder or something like that. You'd be C drive, users/flutter/bin. Just copy that path. Make sure you have that path. I think if you can't find it up here, you can right click on the folder, go to properties, and you should be able to find the path right here. It shows the location. So once you have that, what we need to do, at least on Windows, is we need to add this to our system path or our environment variables. So if you type env or environment, you should see the edit the system environment variables pan popping up. Again, this is Windows specific. If you're on Mac, you're going to have to follow along with this guide here from the Flutter docs that shows you how to modify your path. So anyways, I opened my environment variables. It's right here. I'm going to select, from the advanced tab, environment variables. And you're going to see this thing pop up on my screen that it just has all of these different variables in it. So you can see we have like Chocolatey, GoPath, OneDrive, all this other stuff. We're going to look for this one that says path here, and we're just going to click on it and click edit. Now, this is what we want to modify to add our Flutter SDK to the path so that we can use these Flutter commands from our command prompt. So you can see I already have mine added to the path here at the very bottom, but what you need to do if you want to add a new entry into this path is just go somewhere near the bottom of it, hit new, it should bring up a new line. You're going to paste the path that you had to that Flutter's bin folder. So you can see I have Flutter/bin. You're going to press enter like that, and you're going to press OK. Now I've got mine in there twice. That's totally fine. It's not going to make a difference. But you get the point. You should be able to hopefully just add that in. So actually, let me delete this one just because I don't want to have it duplicated. But once you have this inside the path, OK, you should be able to click apply here or OK or something like that. That should save all the settings. And now if you restart your command prompt window, so let me just actually get rid of both of these for a second. If you restart it, you should be able to type Flutter like that. Now, if you can type Flutter and you see something popping up, you have achieved that step, you've accomplished that one, so we are good to continue on. So the next thing we're going to do is actually from our command prompt, we're going to type Flutter Doctor like this. Now, what this does is scan your system and analyze if you have the right dependencies for Flutter. If you don't, it will automatically install them for you with the exception of a few different things. So what we're going to do is type Flutter Doctor, press enter. And at any point throughout the rest of the video, if you think that something has gone wrong, if you don't have the right dependencies, go ahead and run Flutter Doctor, hit enter, and it will tell you what you're missing or what you need to install. So we can see here that it's saying Flutter, channel stable, good, we have that installed. It says Android toolchain developed for Android devices. Some Android licenses not accepted. To resolve this, run Flutter Doctor Android licenses. So we're going to do that because, well, we need to do this so it's going to work for Android devices. So I'm going to copy that. And actually, I don't think I can paste that. And I'm going to go Flutter Doctor and then hyphen Android, if we spell that right, hyphen licenses. Is that how you spell licenses? I think it is. And let's see if this will fix the licensing issue for us. So I think we have to review all of these. So I'm just going to hit Y on all of them, and all SDK packages licenses are accepted. So now we're good to go. So let me run Flutter Doctor one more time and let's see what it's saying now and see if that fixed that. And that seems to be good. So now it just says Android Studio Flutter plugin not installed, Dart plugin not installed. That's fine. We're not going to be using Android Studio for development, so we don't need that. It says VS Code, that one looks good, and no devices are connected. All right, so now Flutter Doctor is good. Hopefully you guys have run that and all the dependencies have been installed. And the next thing we're going to do is actually go and install Android Studio. Now we need Android Studio because we have to be able to run an Android SDK or have an SDK and actually run on an Android emulator so that we don't have to plug in a physical device when we want to actually test our application. Now you can actually plug in, say, like a phone, an iPhone, Android, whatever it is, and you can run off of that device. I find that sometimes that's a little glitchy and I just don't want to be messing around with my physical device in development. So I'd rather just run this on an emulator. And of course, for the purpose of the video, it's going to be a lot easier if I just have it on the actual screen. So we need Android Studio if you want to actually run an emulator. And I think you need it regardless. So just go ahead and download Android Studio. So again, link in the description. When you download Android Studio, make sure you install the Android SDK. I think that will come with it by default, but that's pretty much the only thing you're going to need. And I'll talk about some more specifics within Android Studio once you've done that. So once you've downloaded Android Studio, you're going to go ahead and boot it up. And what we're going to do here is we're going to build our actual first emulator. There's a few settings in here I need to go through to make sure this is all set up specifically for Flutter. If you're on an Intel CPU, you are lucky because everything is probably just going to work for you right out of the box. You're not really going to need to change anything or make any modifications. If you're using an AMD CPU in your system, you can find that out, I think, by either looking at your physical system. It will probably say Intel or AMD, like there might be a sticker or something like that if you're on a laptop, or I think you can go into like device manager or something like that and look at what your CPU is. Regardless, figure out if you're on Intel or AMD. And if you're on AMD, you're gonna need to follow the following steps. And actually on Intel, you might need to do this too, so just follow along. We're gonna go to Android Studio once this is boot up. We're gonna go to Tools. We're gonna go to SDK Manager right here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Android SDK, and we're first going to make sure that we have one of the more recent versions installed. Don't worry if you have an older SDK installed, that's fine as long as it's not super old, but make sure you have one of those installed here. If you don't, use this tool to select where you want to install it and install it. We're going to need the SDK to be able to go along with this. Next, we're going to go to SDK tools. So here you can see the tools that I have checked and compare that to the tools that you have checked. So right now I have the Android SDK command line tool. We're going to need that one for sure. So give that a check mark. So check like that. We are going to need the Android emulator. So make sure that is checked. We need the build tools from Android SDK, which you should already have. And now this is the specific step for AMD. If you're on AMD, you need to check this box right here for the Android emulator hypervisor driver for AMD processors. You also need to make sure you have the Android SDK platform tools. I'm pretty sure we're going to be using that one. And if you're on Intel, so you have an Intel CPU, look down here, it says Intel x86 emulator accelerator. You're going to want to install that. That's going to make your emulator probably about 10 times faster than it would be without that. So once you have these things checked appropriately, you're going to go ahead and hit apply. It's probably going to run you through a big installation process, and you're going to install all of these different tools. So go through that, make sure everything installs properly, and then we'll be off to the next step. Now, quick note here, if you are on actually any computer, what you're going to need to do if any of these steps break is you're going to need to actually enable virtualization. Now, virtualization is a feature of your CPU. You can actually enable that from your computer's BIOS, which is something that I actually can't show you unless I film, say, with my smartphone, because I can't screen record the BIOS. But what you need to do is go into the BIOS. You need to find whatever BIOS it is. You're going to have to look up how you enable virtualization for your CPU, and you're going to need to do that. Now, most of you should actually already have that enabled, but if for some reason you don't have that enabled, go into your BIOS. You do that usually by spamming F2, F11, or F10 when you're actually booting up into the system. So before you hit the Windows load screen, it should bring you into some crazy looking hackish environment, and you need to go, I believe, at least for my BIOS, it was in the overclock settings, it was in the CPU features, and then I enabled virtualization. So you need that, otherwise this will not work. Again, that will require a restart of your computer to be able to do that. So hopefully you do that. Once you have, make sure all this stuff is installed. And then what we're going to do is actually create our first Android emulator, and then we'll be somewhat close to the finish line here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to where it says devices. So in this little kind of bar over here, actually, let me see if I can zoom in at all. It doesn't look like they have the Control Plus working here. But anyways, we're going to go to OpenAVD Manager. And now we are going to actually work on picking our device and creating a device. So you can see I have two devices here. I have one running API 25, one running API 30. But I'm going to create a new one for this tutorial. And what I'm going to do is go to phone, and I'm going to select whatever device I want to use to actually run my app on. So you guys can pick whatever you want. Pick a phone, please, for a mobile app, but pick any phone you want. I usually like to just go with the Pixel 3, but again, pick any device, doesn't really matter. I just like picking something that kind of has an in-between screen size or a screen size similar to the phone that I use, so that I actually know kind of the layout and how big this is relatively. So what I'm going to do is go Pixel 3. I'm going to press next. And now I'm going to choose whatever API I actually want to use on this device. Now, if you're on an Intel machine, you're lucky, you can pick whatever you want, and I highly recommend that you pick an x86 API here. So usually you just go with the most recent one. In this case, you can see R. So I clicked download on R. I've already done that. Otherwise, it would show me this download button. That's going to take a minute or two. Then you select this one and press next. Now, let's say if you select one of these devices and you get a little warning on the right-hand side here that says, hey, your computer's not capable of running this emulator, blah, 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 whatever. Go to other images, and then what you can do is select one of these ARM EAB versions here. So if you, for some reason, cannot work on an x86 ABI or API or whatever you want to call it, go over here to other images and download the most recent one that it says is acceptable for your system. You're going to pick one that is ARM EABB, and then whatever version number here. 7 is fine, 8 is fine. Just don't pick these ARM ones like that. You got to pick one that's ARM EABI. Sorry, that is a mouthful. So anyways, I'm going to go on this x86 release here. I'm going to press next. And then I'm just going to name the device whatever I want. You can name this Flutter device or Flutter emulator, something like that. Maybe that's good. And press finish. Now, since I actually don't want to make another device because I already have one made, I'm just going to press cancel there. You guys would have pressed finish. And now we have a device that we hopefully will be able to use. So there we go. That should be all good. And now we're going to be off to the next step, which is non-involve Android Studio. So what you're going to realize here is that Android Studio is really just being used for the emulator and for the Android SDK. We're not going to use it for development, although we could use it for development. I just prefer to use VS Code. So that's the one I'm going to use for this tutorial. And I think it's just a little bit better in my opinion. I also do work for Microsoft on the VS Code team. So take that into account when you're considering my bias. But anyways, I'm going to leave a link to download VS Code in the description. I assume most of you probably already have that. Once you download it, install VS Code. There's no tricks there. You should be able to just install it fine. Then what we're going to do is you're going to open up VS Code. You can see I actually already have a Flutter application open. So I'm just going to open a new window so we start fresh here. And I'm going to show you how we can actually set up Flutter so we can start developing in VS Code. So we're almost in the home stretch here. We're almost done. Don't worry. What we're going to do to start is we're actually going to go to the Extensions tab, which is this one right here. So these 4 little cubes, you should see this in your VS Code window. And we are going to go search Extensions Marketplace, and we are going to search for the Flutter extension. So you can see the Flutter extension pops up. It's made by Dart Code. We're going to go ahead and click install. I already have this installed, but it will ask you to install. There might be some pop-ups in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that you need to accept, and then you should be good. Now, the next one we're going to do is Dart. So we're going to install this Dart plugin. I believe that, or Dart extension, whatever you want to call it. I believe installing the Flutter extension automatically installs the Dart extension. I could be wrong, but just make sure you have both Dart and Flutter. Again, you can find that by just searching, Dart like that and Flutter in the marketplace. Once you have that, there's no restart required. All we're going to do is actually set up our Flutter environment and make our first Flutter project. So I'm going to go and hit Control-Shift-P on my keyboard. What this does is that opens the, command prompt or terminal or whatever this thing is that you want to call it, command manager. I don't know the exact name that they go by. But anyways, that is Control-Shift-P. That's going to open this up, command palette. Sorry, I think that's what it's called. And what we're going to do is we're going to type Flutter like this. We're going to go Flutter new project. So we're going to click Flutter new project. This is going to ask us what the name of our project should be. We are actually going to just go with Hello World for right now. I'm going to hit enter, and you can see Flutter tutorial. I already got one named Hello World. Let's just go ahead and put tutorial inside of here. So I'm changing the name of it actually. I'm going to go select a folder to create the project in. Let's see, let's make a new folder. So new folder, let's go tutorial like that. And let's go inside of this folder and save our Flutter project. So there we go. We can see Flutter is now being created. So it's creating a new project for us. We could do this manually from the command line, but since VS Code has this nice extension, we're just going to use it. And there we go. Our Flutter app is actually up and running. Now I'm going to show you how we can get this running on the emulator in just 1 second, but hopefully all of this is working for you. This code was generated, and now you actually have some, hello world application or whatever you decide to name it on your system with Dart code inside of it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit Control-Shift-P again. We're going to go to the command palette, and what we're going to do is we're going to say Flutter like this, and we're just going to have a look at some of the commands that we have here. So we have launch emulator, run Flutter Doctor, change SDK, clean project, and a bunch of other stuff. So if there's anything you need to do from Flutter, you can use the VS Code extension. Again, that's Control-Shift-P, Command-Shift-P, I believe, if you are on Mac. That will open up the command palette, and you can have a look and run these different commands. Now, what we're actually going to do, though, is pick the device that we want to run this Flutter app on. So if you have a device plugged into your computer, you might actually be able to select it right now. What we're going to do is go to VS Code, go to the bottom right-hand corner here where it says no device, and we're going to select the emulator that we created in Android Studio as our device. Now, again, if you have your Android device plugged in here, I believe it only works for Android, a physical device if you're on Windows, then you should be able to select that device. But I'm going to select Start Pixel 3 API 30 Mobile Emulator. So I'm going to run that. We're going to give this a second, and hopefully it's going to boot up the emulator for us, and we're going to give it a second to actually start connect and then hopefully run our sample application. So there we go. The emulator is up. Looks as though it's working okay, and if you got to this stage, you have pretty much set up your Flutter environment correctly, and we're going to be ready for development. Now, if something's gone wrong here, if it says, cannot connect to device, cannot find device, first, make sure that you have those CPU instructions that I talked about. Make sure you followed those. So you have virtualization enabled from your BIOS. You're going to need to do that on your computer if you don't already. You have that little tick mark on the AMD hypervisor thing that I told you to do if you're on an AMD processor, and you have the Intel, I believe it's HAMX or something like that, whatever that checkbox was for Intel, installed. So once you have all that, that should work. You should be able to run the emulator. If you have a physical device, again, you can plug that in. You should be able to select that from down here. So I'm just going to turn this on by hitting the power button once. You can see that's bringing me to where I left off. I was running a Flutter app on this previously, but let's now see if we can actually get our app to run on this device. So from within VS Code, what we're going to do is run this app. To do that, you can simply press F5 on your keyboard, or you can go to the Run tab here. So it's a little bug with a run icon, and you should be able to actually run the app. So now you can see that. Let's actually refresh this here for a second and see if it pops up on the Android emulator. All right, so I press run. I just closed the old app because that was just an old instance that was running on my machine. And once you press run, you should be able to look in the debug console here and see that some stuff is starting to happen. Now on the initial run, this will take a second to actually boot up. It needs to take all the code and compile it and actually put it onto the correct device. So you can see here it's saying Dart Dev Tools includes additional tools for debugging and profiling Flutter apps, including a widget inspector. Try it. I'm going to go ahead and try that. So I'm going to click open. You're going to see that's going to bring me into my browser here, into this detailed debug environment, so I can actually have a look at everything that's going on in my application. Now, we're not going to talk more about this later. We're not really going to be using it a ton because we're not doing any crazy development right now, but this is a really nice way to actually be able to figure out what's going on in your app, look at all of the widgets, look at all of the dependencies, everything that's happening, do a refresh, select specific widgets, all that fun stuff, and one of the reasons why Dart is just a great development thing to use. All right, so you can see that now on my device, this is actually running. This is the demo app from Flutter. You should have the exact same one. And what you can do is you can press this button, And you can see that some border around our app is changing, random colors, and we have the count of how many times we press this button. Now, I believe we're getting that border because we're in this debugger tool here. But regardless, that is all I wanted to do in this video, is get us set up and running and show you how we can actually get Flutter working on our machine. Now, an interesting thing with Flutter is that you can actually do something called a hot refresh. So rather than having to rebuild the app every single time you make a change, you can press this little lightning button here. This is a hot reload. What that will do is just take whatever code you've changed and apply that. So make the change on the device in live time. So you don't need to rebuild every single time you want to test something. You just press that little lightning button and immediately it will make the change on the device. And I think it does not change state when you do that. I could be wrong on that. We're going to talk more about this in later videos, but I just want to show you that there is this hot reload thing, which is a really cool development feature. So yeah. All right, so with that being said, that has been it for the first video. In the next videos, we're going to dig into this code. We're going to talk more about Flutter. We're going to build some more applications and all of that. With that being said, if you enjoyed, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and of course, I will see you guys in the next Flutter tutorial.